The next two videos are a paper I was asked to write when I was in Indonesia about corruption. I presented it at a high school where one of my weekend students taught school. Okay. Philosophy, Education, and Corruption, a model for anti-corruption education in Indonesia. Introduction, Corruption in Indonesia and Throughout Human History. I know why I've been asked to speak about corruption and how to educate children so they will not become corrupt when they're adults. Corruption is a terrible problem in Indonesia. Sometime in the future, Indonesia might end up with another authoritarian government, as they've had in the past, and people will say that the cause was the prevalence of corruption that began soon after, even immediately after, the corrupt government was overthrown. The problem stems in part from the fact that the previous regime still has an influence on Indonesian politics and all areas of social and political life. To whatever degree this is true, the problem of corruption must be addressed in every possible way, or Indonesia could very likely regress into a non-democratic nation, much to the despair of the majority of Indonesians and to people throughout the world. Everyone in the world needs Indonesia to succeed as a democratic nation, particularly because Indonesia has 88% Muslims and needs to set an example of a nation with Muslim citizens who embrace democracy and who have the skills and desire to develop and maintain a society where those with power do what they can to make it possible for all citizens to have the material goods they need and to develop themselves as cultural beings through education and access to positions of authority in all the social and economic sectors of society. As an educator myself, I've decided that the best way to address the problem of corruption, for me to address it, is to educate young people. I've chosen to focus on college-age students because my sense of calling lies there. Other educators, like you, here at the school, feel most motivated to educate students at other stages of their lives. All serious educators want to be role models and be virtuous and just adults that students can look up to, imitate, learn from, and remember when they're grown. Whatever citizens do as adults, they should have had many positive experiences with many morally excellent and professionally competent teachers who've shown them that their nation is filled with good, committed, professional adults. They should be motivated to use whatever authority they have to promote the well-being of others, remembering how many adults promoted their own well-being when they needed teachers and other authorities to help them develop into the professionals they eventually become. Teachers play a large role in the formation of children and the prevention of corruption just by doing their jobs well. As educators in Indonesia, then, I'm sure you are very grieved when you hear and read about the corruption of your rulers. Either they were educated in schools that somehow corrupted them, or they ignored all the efforts their educators made to show them and teach them they should use their talents for the well-being of others. Something has gone wrong in the process of their development. There's a social position in the culture, a social poison in the culture coming from somewhere or from many sectors of society that leads to large-scale corruption and that threatens the stability and future of the nation. Every day Indonesians read in the newspapers about the corruption of their leaders, how those they trust have betrayed them, spending their tax money or allowing foreign companies to exploit the nation's natural resources, or any number of other ways they show that they care only about themselves and their families and friends at the expense of all other Indonesians, without any concern for the well-being of the nation as a whole and its future as a free and open society. How can they sleep at night? How can they live with themselves? What can be done to stop this? Before becoming too discouraged about corruption in Indonesia, however, Let me take a moment to tell you how discouraged I am at the corruption of my country. It is clear to anyone who follows U.S. history and politics that the worst corruption in the U.S. is not with people breaking the laws. By far the worst kind of corruption is the fact that the rich pay for the lawmakers' political campaigns. They win those campaigns because of that money, and they use their power to create laws or not to create laws that serve the interests of the rich who paid for their campaigns. The rich do not need to break laws to amass wealth and create an anti-democratic, entrenched oligarchy. Our nation can appear to be democratic and really be ruled by the super rich. When Indonesians talk about corruption, they do not mean this kind of corruption. It might be a problem or it might become a problem. Indonesians should work hard to prevent the rich from controlling the nation. For now, it's a bigger problem in the U.S. than in Indonesia. Further, American corruption creates hardship and conflict all over the world. I did not come to this conference as a citizen of a society that is more developed and civilized and functions under the rule of law. I do not want you to think that my nation is less corrupt than yours and that I'm going to teach you about how to become less corrupt by referring you to what we do in the U.S. Both you and I would be a lot better off if this were the case. Although I love my country, my love is not an ignorant love. I'm not blind to the real problems and corruption in the U.S. now or at any time in the past. I've come to this conference as a fellow traveler on the long, hard road of life, as Socrates describes it in the Republic. I come as a citizen of the third largest nation in the world, a nation that has a reputation for having been a democratic society for 237 years. I'm speaking with citizens of the fourth largest nation in the world, a nation with a very young, very frail democratic society. I come to speak and to listen. I come to engage you in conversation, even though I know there's never enough time to talk. I come to speak in hopes that what I say will inspire you to talk to each other and learn something about how to preserve and develop the democracy you have and that you want to preserve. You would not be here if you did not want to learn about how to develop and maintain a healthy democratic society. You recognize that your nation has a disease that might destroy your democracy. You want to find out how education can be part of the medicine to cure the illness. My nation is also sick. The sickness is typical for a nation that has been too wealthy and too powerful for too long. The wealth and power are getting concentrated. Education is supposed to cure any nation of its illnesses, so we must find out together what education can do for each of us. Rule number 1. Do not give up. Do not get too upset. Do not let this take away your motivation or make you bitter, cynical, or even allow you to justify becoming corrupt yourself. Everybody does it is the worst excuse for corruption. It says the disease is not so bad, so I will feed it and make it worse. We do not want students who are struggling to give up, so we should not give up. Besides, Indonesia's illness is far from terminal. The nation's healthier than it has been even in the recent past. To give one example, there were probably no international seminars about corruption and anti-corruption education in Indonesia when during the recent authoritarian administration. This is not because there was no corruption. Indonesians are only now finding out how corrupt that administration was. The situation was clearly much, much worse than it is now. Even if there had been any seminars on corruption during that time, they either would have been designed to create the appearance that the administration was just, or else they would have been censored or monitored by the ruling regime. Second, corruption, as the news defines it, is actually illegal. People get taken to court and then to prison for engaging in this behavior. This implies that Indonesia has good laws. The problem is not with the laws, It's with the leaders who have the power and break the laws. I cannot say that about my own country. Our problem is the laws. Third, leaders who break the laws are taken to court and tried and found guilty. Everyone is subject to the laws, even the lawmakers and the elite class. This is often not the case. Indonesia has the institutionalization of the rule of law. This is a great achievement for any nation and a critical part of a democratic society. Fourth, Indonesia has a free press that has access to the halls of power, and they can write newspaper articles that tell the truth about the corruption of the rulers. A free press that has the power to find out the facts and communicate them to the public is another crucial part of a democratic society. Many societies today and in the past have not had these great institutions or have lost them. Take pride in the fact that you've created and sustained this level of democracy. Without these basic institutions, the public would never be able to get informed, so they could exercise their responsibilities as citizens, such as voting intelligently, demonstrating against rulers they think are corrupt, knowing what is going on in the political life of the nation, etc. The public might appear to be able to vote, but the process is corrupted by stuffing ballot boxes, controlling who's on the ballot, not giving citizens any information so they have any idea of how to vote, or what those on the ballot have done or are likely to do with their power. Again, Indonesians know this. The previous administration created the appearance of a democratic society while at the same time exercising absolute power. Now for the dark side. Even when there's a great deal of corruption in every other sector of society, corruption among the political class is particularly abhorrent. Politicians should know this and do everything it can to exercise their power for the well-being of citizens. When business leaders get too greedy and force the public to, for example, look at half-naked women's bodies all day, trying to sell us cars, mobile phones, or anything at all by reminding us we're sexual beings, we might be dismayed or even appalled. But we know such offensive advertising cannot be illegal. Making many business practices illegal would only lead to too much power of government leaders, power that can more easily be corrupted. Business people get paid to sell products. Studies show that using half-naked women's bodies to sell something, anything, leads to more sales. If citizens don't like it, in a society that gives citizens as many choices as possible to make their lives what they want them to be, then they can choose not to buy those products. They can even demonstrate at the company headquarters against such advertisements. But an economic sector that is not run by the government is one part of a democratic society. The world knows what happens when there is no separate economic sector. No one wants a few rulers to have that much control over the lives of citizens. Politicians, however, have a very different responsibility to their societies. They represent a sacred aspect of human life, our God-given ability and need to live together under the rule of law. This level of association enables and even forces us to get beyond our family, friends, and whoever we identify with. We are capable of this kind of association because we're the only species on the planet whose God-given destiny includes political association. We cannot be human unless and until we can understand ourselves as human beings by nature and as equally human in this respect. Our capacity for empathy toward people we don't know personally, our ability to recognize the reasoning powers in others that are the same powers we have in ourselves, is a huge leap beyond the capacities of any other animal. The business world, by nature, exists to meet basic needs, even though in our sophisticated societies, businesses are mostly creating goods and services we do not need. The kind of association business is based on is just a more complex version of what animals do when they live in herds or packs. Political association is fundamentally different. It is sacred. It is our duty to God to use the intellectual capacities we have been given, and it's a great affront to God to abuse this kind of power. Since this conference is being held on the island of Java, I hope I can safely say that I think all the powers of soul human beings possess have evolved over time. It's a wonder of nature to me the way humanity has evolved since the time of Java man. I think of it as a long process of becoming what God always intended people to become, of gradually being able to exercise the potential of a human brain to create communities based on the rule of law and to form communities that promote the mature exercise of the human capacities for artistic creativity, scientific discovery, mathematical pattern creating, political community, and all the other great cultural achievements of the human race. We glorify God and God's intention for us when we engage in such higher order kinds of activities and inspire others to do so. The great gift of political leaders is to provide the context which makes all of these activities possible. A peaceful society based on the rule of law, where people can act to fulfill their basic needs and then have some leisure time to exercise those activities of soul that are a great affirmation of our humanity and that enable us to glorify God by becoming the fully human creatures the deity or whatever, the universe, whatever you want to call it, wants us to be. Whether or not people are conscious of this philosophical context, it is clear that when politicians are corrupt, they create a terrible national history. People want to be proud of their countries. Indonesians want to be able to tell the story of their nation in the way every citizen wants to be able to tell the story of their nations. In Indonesia's specific case, Indonesians want to tell their children stories of how the Indonesians fought off the Dutch and the Japanese and all others that abused them, and then created their own free and open society. They want to say that when they took over all the positions of civilized societies, they showed themselves and everyone else that they were not inferior by nature and unable to govern themselves, as their oppressors had wanted to believe. They want to tell their children stories of one Indonesian after another, ruling well, creating great art, making scientific discoveries, inventing goods and services that promoted the well-being of their fellow citizens, and exercising all the kinds of human excellence we were born to exercise. When people engaged in any of these sacred activities are shown to be corrupt, when scientists lie about their data, when artists steal ideas, when politicians use their power to help their friends, we're deeply wounded and appalled. We want to believe we were born for more than just finding new ways to survive or to get rich. Our religious traditions are always telling us we were born for more than the mere satisfaction of our physical needs. We were born to glorify the universe or God by relating to each other in ways that go far beyond using each other for survival needs or getting rich or powerful. This is why political corruption should horrify us, and why citizens in a society where they have the power to stay informed and speak out have a God-given responsibility to do so, and to replace corrupt leaders with those who have the desire and ability to use political power for the well-being of the people and of the nation as a whole. Hearing about corruption among political leaders is depressing, to be sure, but one must also remember that political corruption is covered extensively by the press, while corruption in every other sector of society is not. How many news stories tell of teachers who come to class late or unprepared? How much do we hear about artists who are given grants and then do not spend much time actually engaged in their artistic work? How much do we hear about scientists who cut corners, or scholars who are not producing scholarship, or not citing sources? But how much do we hear about our politicians' personal, social, political activities, day and night, obsessively fixating on what they are or are not doing for us? Adults get up in the morning and fail to perform their personal, social, economic, and political duties, or do so poorly every day. We all suffer indirectly when they do, and when we do too. We want to know about politicians because we know we need them. We depend on them to survive and to thrive. Without the rule of law, we are faced with living in tribes that defend their own while engaged in the rule of the jungle in relation to everyone else. We live in complex societies. We need many years of education to be able to fulfill our social, economic, and political roles. We need politicians to create educational institutions and appoint people to run them who will do their jobs well. Human life has developed way past the era of tribes and villages. We now need political association to survive. The press needs to be a watchdog and keep track of what politicians are doing. The worst effect of such reporting, however, is that the public comes to think political corruption is by far the worst, that politicians are completely untrustworthy, and that only wicked people seek out political careers. In the United States, many citizens want to eliminate political activity altogether because they do not trust politicians. That would be a disaster. Political life, the creating and enforcement of laws, is the only way citizens can protect themselves from unfettered greed, violent abuse, being lied to, getting cheated, education, health care, social security, being taken advantage of in one's work, and being oppressed, exploited, and abused by foreigners and natives alike in all walks of life. No one should condemn political association as such and all of its many institutions simply because those running them are abusing their power or are too ignorant or incompetent to do their jobs. A democratic society requires even more laws and political institutions than other societies. If a society wants to provide opportunities for as many citizens as possible to the highest level possible in education, health care, opportunities of work, etc., it has to set up many, many laws and institutions. Otherwise, the rich will take over, or the military will take over, or members of privileged families will take over. The laws in a democratic society should be designed to prevent the continual drift toward the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. Without government intervention, most of those who have more will keep what they have and try to get more. Citizens in a democratic society must look to their political leaders as the only buffer between their well-being and being abused by the rich and powerful. That is why the press must continually inform them about what their political rulers are doing and figure out how to elect rulers that will not abuse their power. Citizens should not simply give up on political life and pretend they can live without it, because they can't. Educators ought to communicate this understanding throughout a child's education. Children should be reading some kind of newspaper from first grade, getting them in the habit of reading the news. Hopefully, Indonesia has some newspapers designed for children of all ages that teachers can subscribe to, or parents can be asked to find an article every week in the paper, or even a picture for younger children that they would bring to school and discuss, so they would know that they are expected to keep themselves informed about life around them. High school students need to bring articles about corruption, how religion is used to cover up corruption, and all the flaws of their societies. They need to become critical thinkers. They need to read about those leaders in their nation's history who have been considered most just, who have used their power to make laws etc., in ways that have benefited the nation and have left behind a great legacy. Students should be motivated to leave behind their own legacy, even though it will not be as widely known as that of the people they read about. Students need to realize that the way one lives affects people for generations after they're gone, from family members to professional colleagues to fellow citizens. High school students need to be given a sense of the true range of good and evil, the many, many ways people can do things that improve the lives of those who come after them, and the many, many ways people can make the lives of others worse. Students need to have a sense of their responsibility toward other people, present and future, based on what the people from the past have done or failed to do. With all of this in mind, then, the rest of this paper is an effort to give you the definitions and insights about how to think about corruption that I've learned from studying ancient Greek philosophy. Certainly, this is not the only kind of lecture to give at a seminar on anti-corruption education. What I say must be supplemented by all sorts of other overall perspectives, and especially by data that presents a picture of what is actually going on in Indonesia today. A philosopher presents universal categories, what every human being living in a society complex enough to include the rule of law and political association must think about, the context within which to understand the particulars. The rest is up to Indonesians to work on as they continue to improve their budding democratic society. What is corruption? Philosophers are notorious for beginning with definitions and developing a system. Most of the time, those systems are internally consistent and well constructed. The problem, though, is that often they're too abstract, too intellectual, and cannot be applied to daily life. My lecture is systematic, beginning with definitions and showing interconnections. I hope that my training in ancient Greek philosophy will enable me to give you categories and a system that is applicable to you in your daily lives. The relevance of ancient Greek philosophy to daily life was what inspired me to pursue the study of ancient Greek philosophy and culture as a career. I hope I can convey the same level of relevance to you in my presentation here. The ancient Greeks defined justice as rule for the well-being of the ruled, and injustice as rule for the well-being of the ruler. The Greeks knew that political association is different from other kinds of association, but they also knew that a just person exercises rule for the benefit of the ruled in all areas of his or her life, as parents, members of extended families, neighbors, friends, associates, co-workers, fellow citizens, and in all of their human relationships. The Greeks knew that there are better and worse ways of relating to people, and that an average human life includes many, many different kinds of relationships. Some of those relationships are between people who are unequal, such as parents and children. Others are relationships between citizens. In each case, there are better and worse ways of relating. The Greeks also knew that one's life was lived out and remembered for posterity in the context of some history of relationships, even when one's legacy is the formation or application of laws or institutions. Those goals were achieved in a context of relating to people. No one gets anything done without knowing how to treat people appropriately. That is why corruption is so important. When people use the word corruption, they mean injustice or abuses of power of whatever kind. They mean relationships that are aimed toward an irrational goal, such as money or power, or that do not achieve a rational goal for some reason. The role of being a parent can be corrupted in many ways. Because we're born so helpless and need such a long time to develop, children need their parents and will cling to them even when parents abuse their power. Parents physically abuse their children by hitting them too much or too hard. Parents abuse their children by yelling at them or intimidating them or degrading them, or humiliating them in public, etc. The greatest abuse, perhaps, is when adults have children without any plan for how to provide for them or how to treat them. Adults have children because they want them, even when the children might starve or have no health care, no education, no opportunity for a job, etc. Adults might have children with the expectation that the children will work for them, either helping them or making money for them or providing for them in old age. This is also unfair to the children. Certainly those with money cannot tell the poor that they should not have any children, but Indonesians in all social classes should not have as many children as they want. However many children they want, most Indonesians will have 2 or 3 children. The poor should be offered birth control and education in how to limit their family size. They should be encouraged to have no more than 2 children and should be able to send their children to school with the hope that their children will have more opportunities for education, etc., that will make them at least a little wealthier than their parents are. Giving poor people such a hope has been shown to be a way to control the number of births. When parents are hopeless and desperate, they have children so they won't starve later in life, or with the hope that their children will be able to contribute to the family's wealth. Citizens should know that they have responsibilities as citizens now that they live in a democratic society. If they want to preserve democracy, they must be aware of the effect of how many children they have on the well-being of the nation as a whole. For Indonesia as a nation to have a better future, parents must become aware of their responsibility to limit their family size, provide for the children they have, and take advantage of any opportunities the nation has provided for their children to have social mobility. If they do so, continual upward mobility is a very important part of developing and maintaining a strong democratic society and, most importantly, a stable society for everyone. Laws have been made to protect the welfare of children. The state has to intervene if a child is being abused. Even if a family or a particular village has a custom of treating children in ways that have been proven to have a permanent harmful effect on children and is against the law, citizens must know that they are not just members of families, tribes, or villages. They are citizens who live under the rule of law. Children should be educated from grade school to understand this aspect of life through assigned readings and hand-on experiences that communicate this message in many different ways. Many Americans do not understand this, so I realize it's difficult. Yet those Americans who do not understand this are creating many problems in the U.S., problems that cost the government a lot of money unnecessarily, and that create instability for everyone. People who shoot other people in the name of justice, people who have children then abuse them, people who feed their children in ways that make them obese and unhealthy for the rest of their lives, leading to unnecessary health care bills that the state must pay, etc., etc. Serious problems that lead to the need for government intervention can happen in extended families, among friends, and in small villages or close-knit areas of a larger community. Relationships can always go bad, leading to all sorts of violence and abuse. Children need to learn how to react in situations that trigger a desire for violence or abuse. They should also learn to understand why the government has an obligation to intervene in such cases. If children are first taught about cases in the news or unrelated to them personally, they can then recognize why the state should intervene in cases involving people they know. All education should link what is being learned with the students' own lives, showing them why it's important for them to learn and remember the lessons of the day. The educational curriculum should include an understanding of the important function of all social sectors and the kinds of abuses that can occur in each one. As they grow up, citizens need to develop a mental picture of what they see around them every day. Citizens performing their many tasks, some personal, some social, some political. As long as the educational system discusses our collective life every day, it does not require wealth or natural intelligence to develop a mature enough understanding of what it means to be a human being living under the rule of law in a nation state. On the other hand, if the educational system does not include such a mental image as one objective for education, even very bright students will have no understanding of the reality of their lives, the different interlocking communities they are, in fact, living in, and all the people they depend upon to perform all sorts of tasks justly and competently. I am continually amazed at the failure of the American educational system to produce even a minimal understanding of the reality citizens live within. American citizens deny their interdependence and have great illusions about who they are and great delusions about how much power and freedom they really have. My society was founded upon a view of human beings as purely material creatures, using their reasoning powers to calculate the most efficient ways for them to prosper economically as individuals, interacting with other human beings who are also acting in their own self-interest to maximize their own material prosperity. Somehow such behavior is supposed to lead to a happy and materially prosperous society. This ideology is a great lie. It was created to motivate people, not to educate them. The United States is trying to export this false, secular, materialistic, individualistic, and consumer-driven view of reality to the rest of the world. We do it so we can sell people the consumer goods our corporations make. We do it to become richer, to maximize our own nation's material prosperity. The other peoples of the world should not be fooled. They should not buy into the false ideology and should not purchase the unnecessary goods and services we are so desperately trying to sell. Our excess consumption is leading to a concentration of wealth among the few, a refusal of the rich to allow themselves to be taxed so that everyone can have public education, health care, and other services that promote a higher quality of life for everyone, and a desire for more goods, larger houses, and cars among the middle and lower classes that has led them to choose to drive themselves into debt. Americans are debt slaves. Citizens in developing nations should take note of our situation and avoid setting up the same cultural dynamic in their own societies. One way the rich get richer is by colonizing other peoples, as Indonesians well know, and by making other nations their debt slaves. Nations in South and Central America owe the United States enormous amounts of money and pay a huge percentage of their annual gross national product to pay it back. When that market was saturated, the U.S. corporations began to lend money to American citizens and bombarded them with credit cards and advertising. This led to huge levels of credit card debt carried by Americans today. The U.S. healthcare system is driven by greed, the extremely high cost of health care, because citizens cannot even choose to have cheaper government-run health care, means that over 50 million Americans have no health care at all. If one of them gets seriously ill, they are charged the standard exorbitant fees, and often they have to declare bankruptcy. Most of the bankruptcies in the U.S. are triggered by unexpected long-term health care costs. Americans who are over 65 or so do have access to health care provided by the government. Unfortunately, the government is charged the cost of private health care and has to use tax money to pay excess fees and make corporations even richer. No one wants to pay higher taxes. Americans have an obsession against paying taxes. Yet everyone wants to use the healthcare system and to use it as much as they want to for whatever services they want to. Corporations are making billions of dollars providing health care for old people who are desperately trying to keep themselves alive. The older they get, the more corporations profit from their obsession to stay alive. They're sending their exorbitant bills to their children and even to their grandchildren. This is the real fruit of a society based on a secular, materialistic, individualistic view of human beings and their relationships. Americans are destroying themselves, each other, and their nation's future. Why would any other nation admire or want to imitate this? It's shocking that our educational system simply does not teach students what is right in front of their face. The standard curriculum either ignores our collective life or gives students the old ideology of individualism and the belief they can become whatever they want to if they try hard enough. In the meantime, social mobility is declining, and young people who go to college are taking on huge debts with the false promise that they will get jobs that can pay those debts back quickly. This is another lie that promotes the interests of those who benefit from it. In this case, the systems of colleges and universities in the U.S. Every American citizen has a job that depends on increasing our national debt, directly or indirectly. We are living off of our children and our grandchildren. What can be more wicked than this? Corruption in a society driven by greed. The United States is currently, and probably always has been, the nation with an official, legal, free market that has the fewest laws to regulate the market and the smallest government to provide services to all citizens. Previous economic systems have been controlled by an elite few, but they did not pretend to be free markets in a democratic society that claimed to offer equal rights and opportunities to its citizens. Because I'm an American citizen and have lived in the U.S. all my life, I will describe how all aspects of human life can be corrupted by greed. This is the reality I face each day in the U.S. This is the kind of society Indonesia could become. This is the kind of society many developing nations aspire to become. I want to let them know that what it is actually like to live in the U.S., not what the advertisements, television shows, and Hollywood movies present to the outside world as life in America. People throughout the world also engage in some of these types of corruption. America is particularly structured to allow and even reward such behavior. Greed and the parent-child relationships. Consumer goods. The corruption of parents by having children in order to get richer is the opposite of the kind of corruption of parent-child relationships in the U.S. Instead, American families are now destabilized by the billions of dollars spent advertising products for children, leading to children that demand too much, and parents who are willing to go into debt to give them what they want. An entire culture has grown up around excess spending on children, even small children. People feel more and more social pressure to keep up with the neighbors, to buy what they see their neighbors have, so their children do not feel deprived or get ostracized by their friends. If children try out for sports teams and other activities that develop them as human beings, the price of joining a team is always high. Team uniforms, the cost of traveling, elaborate dinners, etc., have become part of the sports culture, demanding that parents pay if they want to prove to society that they're good parents. Parenthood and greed. Education. Public education is getting worse and worse because no one's willing to pay taxes to support the schools. The gap between the quality of education in private schools and that in public schools, pressuring parents to put their children in private schools as soon as possible and if they have any means available. Without private school, their children cannot get into an elite college. Without getting into a better college, they cannot get a better job. From grade school on, then, education is corrupted by wealth. Those with money eventually get the jobs that pay the most money. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Teachers are unable or unwilling to fix the system. A high percentage of teachers in the U.S. vote as Democrats because the Democratic Party has a tradition of asking citizens to pay for public education as a cornerstone of a democratic society. Yet the will to do so has decreased, even for those whose lives are most negatively affected by poor public schools. The middle class is losing jobs, job stability, and income. They're more and more afraid. They're obsessed with not paying taxes. They're willing to be convinced by the rich that the rich must have their taxes cut in order to provide jobs. There's no evidence that this is so. The evidence is in the other direction. Yet fear is driving people to vote for politicians that will shrink the middle class and increase the wealth and security of the rich. Most Americans limit their family size to a size they can supposedly afford because they know the government will not do much to help them. But what it takes to be able to afford a child is becoming more and more the privilege of the few. Everyone else has to give up trying to keep up or go into debt for a long time. Parenthood and greed, energy efficiency. Almost no family in the United States can supposedly survive or do what a supposedly normal family must do without at least one car. It's difficult for a family to be able to do fairly basic things like shop for groceries unless they have two cars. American adults work more hours than citizens anywhere else in the world, meaning that for most families, the parent who drove to work has the car at work for a long time, and the other parent cannot run the errands or get the children to various activities without a second car. This not only leads to personal debt, it also leads to more and more consumption of gas and oil, making the United States more and more dependent on foreign oil, or at the moment we're self-sufficient, but more and more exploitation of the world's resources and more instability because every country is fighting for the oil that's around. We're borrowing money from China and using it to buy oil from Saudi Arabia and other Mideast nations who use the money to establish extremist schools to teach their children to hate the U.S. and to envision a future where Islam dominates the world. Now, at this moment, 2015, we're borrowing money from China, and other countries are buying oil from Saudi Arabia and the Mideast nations. So it's the same kind of dynamic. We're losing the really big international war, the economic war, with the Chinese. We're losing the next biggest war, the war for natural resources, with the Mideast. Our buildings, including homes and offices, have been built with the assumption that everyone will have cars and will drive them many miles a day. Our public transportation systems are so bad that most people have no choice but to have two cars or to buy more gas than they want to. Americans, on average, use 6 times more energy than the rest of the people in the world. Greed and the power of international credit card companies. From the outside, Americans appear wealthy. They have cars, they have their own homes, they live in suburbs and have big yards. They have everything. Underneath this, however, they have debts they do not know how to pay. They're paying credit card companies way more than the original cost of what they buy because of the high interest rates on their credit card debt. Many Americans are caught up in a downward spiral they have no idea how to control. It takes a lot of effort and the willingness to stand out from the crowd to avoid accumulating too much debt and making credit card companies richer. When immediate families are unable to keep up, they are much more likely to abuse their power or ask others to do so. People who hire people for jobs are more often asked to help out family members or friends of friends rather than to follow the law, advertise the job openly and publicly, interview the most qualified candidates, hire the best one, apart from family or friends. This is the only way a democratic society truly exists, and can be sustained. Without a truly free market in the process of hiring, a nation is simply hiding behind the appearance of equality and equal opportunity and deluding itself about its respect for equality. So far I'm just showing how greed affects all relationships. The U.S. is just one example, and I'm trying to show the Indonesians what can happen, because right now the Indonesians I knew are kind of aspiring to be like the U.S. in some ways. And so we just want to level the playing field and see things for what they are. So the next half of this paper starts out with greed and the church, and then it goes on, and about a third of the way through it applies specifically to Indonesia.